As we approach Independence Day on Monday, can we honestly say we're one nation under God, indivisible, or are we a nation divided? The clash of cultures and ideologies has once again risen to the surface with the recent Supreme Court rulings. On today's Weekend Connection, our guest will explain that when any culture starts calling good evil and evil good, truth is the only rebellion left. Join us for a special Weekend Connection today on BBN. My guest today is Dr. Everett Piper, who served as president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University for 17 years. He's the author of the national bestseller, Not a Daycare: The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. Dr. Piper is a contributing columnist for the Washington Times and has provided guest commentary for dozens of talk radio programs. Dr. Piper, welcome to Weekend Connection today on BBN.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Dr. Piper, I first became aware of you when I read your essay, This is Not a Daycare, It's a University. And this led to the writing of your book, Not a Daycare. These writings capture what is occurring on college campuses today, which then flows out into the culture. What event triggered that response from you?
Well, the reason I wrote it was you and I and millions of other people have been watching this insanity, this lunacy that's prevailing in the ivory tower, the colleges and universities from coast to coast. So whether it's Brown on the East Coast or Berkeley on the West, it seems that those institutions, as well as almost everyone in between, have bought into the microaggression argument, the safe spaces, the call for attending to trigger warnings and trying to make students feel comfortable on campus. And I was incredulous as I was watching the story, but what really happened here at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, after a required chapel service, we had a student come forward after the chapel service and confront the speaker and say, "You offended me. You singled me out today in the chapel talk. And you made me feel uncomfortable. You made my peers feel uncomfortable." The chapel speaker gave me a heads up and said, "Hey, somebody on your campus, one of your kids, played the victimization card today after chapel." I said, "Really? Well, what was your topic on?" He said, 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13, the quintessential love chapter of the Bible, offended this kid. I was incredulous. I basically wrote my op-ed in response to that story, and I said, if you want to feel comfortable and coddled rather than confronted, you're in the wrong place. We want you to be a man of character. We're not going to make you feel safe in your sin. We're going to ask you to confess what it is that's wrong with you rather than blame everybody else for what's wrong with them. My land, this is a university, it's not a daycare, grow up. And as a result of that, you and I are talking and...
Right. Dr. Piper, as one reads the textbook definition of fascism, part of its defining guideline is the forcible suppression of opposition. It seems that many college campuses are veering awfully close to this by shutting down any debate that a vocal minority may disagree with. How did this intellectual fascism, as you call it, become fashionable to some of our young people today?
Well, it's the reversal of terms. It goes back to the original sin. When Adam and Eve were told they could do anything in the Garden of Eden except one thing, eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. At first blush, you might read that story and think, well, why wouldn't God want them to eat the fruit of that tree? Wouldn't God want them to know what's good and what's evil? Why did he tell them not to eat that fruit? Well, we find the answer in the very words of Satan. He tells Eve that if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will become as God. You will become God. You will know what's right and wrong and good and evil. You can define those things. You won't need God any longer to tell you what the definition of those terms are. You decide. You will be as God. And that's what we see in the academy today. We will decide what the definition of tolerance is. We will decide what the definition of love is. We will decide who's a fascist and who's not. Forget all objective standards. Forget the measuring rod of truth. The measuring rod outside of those things being measured so that you can do some measuring, to quote C.S. Lewis. Forget all of that. We can reverse the order of everything and call good evil and evil good, bitter sweet and sweet bitter. We can decide. We are as God. And that's why you see the opposite of what words really mean prevailing in the campus green today. We hear people saying, I can't tolerate your intolerance, not recognizing that they are demonstrating themselves to be the very intolerant person that they condemn. We see people conflating love with sex and sex with love, not realizing that you can love a lot of people that you don't have sex with, or at least I hope you do, and therefore love and sex are not synonymous terms. They reverse the order of male and female and male, and they reverse the definitions of fascism. And we have ideological fascism under the banner of intellectual freedom, not realizing that they're being fascist as they wave that banner.
This is Weekend Connection on BBN. I'm Stephen Brown, and I'm talking with Dr. Everett Piper, past president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Dr. Piper, as we're talking already, we're coming to the understanding that we have created an environment in higher education, if not before, where it seems that we're teaching anything and everything but the basics, and our kids are suffering because of it.
Absolutely. And the subtitle of my new book, the book is titled Not a Daycare, subtitled The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. The ivory tower is supposed to be about veritas, Latin for truth, university, univerity, univeritas. This is the unity of truth. That's why colleges and universities exist. In fact, if you want to go back 1,000 years, let's say, to the cradle of the Liberal Arts Academy, let's go back to Oxford 1,000 years ago. Why was it established? To educate a free people, to educate a free culture, a free country, a free church. It was an education in liberty and liberation, thus the word liberal. A classical liberal was somebody who believed in liberty, and that liberty was granted through the words of Jesus. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Right.
The classical model of the ivory tower, of the academy, of the college and the university was an education in truth with a capital T. In fact, the words of Jesus used to be emblazoned across many a library header across the Western world, whether it be Oxford or whether it be University of Michigan and everybody in between. They had the words of Jesus, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. What we've lost today in the college and university discussion and in our culture is the objective standard of truth. And G.K. Chesterton told us, when you get rid of the big laws, you don't get liberty, but rather thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum. And we've gotten rid of truth, the big laws, the 10, if you will, and Jesus narrowed it down to 2. We can't live by 10 or 2 simple laws any longer, so what do you see? Thousands upon thousands, reams upon reams of little laws created by man, down to the point where they're telling us how to use the bathroom. That's not freedom, that's fascism.
Dr. Piper, speaking of truth, or the lack of it, the words tolerance and inclusiveness have lost their original meanings to the point that we're rewriting the dictionary. It seems that tolerance is now a code word and the measuring stick for what is acceptable now in society. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that tolerance is now demonstrated in society by being intolerant of God's truth and His righteous laws.
Oh, spot on. You're spot on. And going back to something that I hinted at earlier, we live in a time, in a place, where people in my industry actually say stuff like this. I can't tolerate your intolerance. I hate you hateful people. I'm sure that nothing is sure. I know that nothing can be known, and I'm absolutely confident there are no absolutes. The reversal of terms, everything's upside down. It's self-refuting at every turn. They're sawing off the branch upon which they sit. They just don't recognize it. You can't say, I can't tolerate your intolerance without being the very thing that you're criticizing. You can't say, I hate those hateful people without being a hateful person. You can't make these claims without recognizing, well, you can do it without recognizing because apparently they're oblivious to the fact that their worldview implodes upon itself. It holds no water. It's self-refuting. The branch is going to crack and come tumbling down, and it's going to be a very, very awkward and difficult fall when our culture implodes upon itself with no standards to recognize the lunacy of these statements.
Dr. Piper, your book, Not a Daycare, takes a hard look at what's happening around the country and examines the demand for safe spaces. And in your book, you address the infantilization of the American spirit. What do you mean by that?
Oh, everything's juvenile now. It's like little children, okay, who are having a temper tantrum and say, you made me uncomfortable. I don't like that because I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. That's not a mature and adult response. Adults recognize what you learned in sport. No pain, no gain. Adults recognize what you learn practicing music. If you don't learn the laws of rhyme and rhythm and cadence, you can't perform a concerto. It's nothing but chaos. Adults recognize the paradox of discipline and freedom, and that if you don't discipline yourself to the rules of the game, you can't play the sport. Adults recognize those things. Children don't. Sometimes adolescents don't. But adults do. And what we have is spiritual and intellectual adolescence. And these kids that were graduating from college don't understand that maturity brings responsibility and the benefit, the understanding of the benefit of the paradox of discipline and freedom, and that when you do have some pain, there's actually ultimate gain, and that in the real world, you actually have to navigate these waters of law and liberty, freedom and fences, and these paradoxes that actually produce a free people and a free culture.
You're listening to Weekend Connection on BBN, and I've been discussing the clash of cultures on college campuses with Dr. Everett Piper. So, Dr. Piper, let's end where we began in our introduction. You desire for Christian education that models a way of thought, life, and faith in a critically engaged community. Now, if only we could see this play out every day, not only on a college campus, but in our churches and homes, where I'm sure you would agree this education should begin for our young people.
Absolutely. In fact, I've argued over and over again at Oklahoma Wesleyan. But frankly, if I don't give you Christ, Scripture, truth, wisdom, primacy of Christ, priority of Scripture, pursuit of truth, and the practice of wisdom, if I don't give you those things, then you're wasting your time and money. But if I do give you those things, and that's all you get, if that's all you got out of me, you got your money's worth, because you're not going to get it at many other campuses today. That foundation is critical to a moral life. It's critical for a free life. And without those things, all other education is built on sand and will crumble. But with that solid foundation, you will get the freedom and the dignity that comes through honoring a biblical worldview and commitment to the gospel and to God being God, as opposed to elevating the man and the woman to be in the image of God and then worshiping them accordingly, and then watching culture fall apart as the result.
On Weekend Connection today, I have been speaking to Dr. Everett Piper, past president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University from 2002 until his retirement in 2019. He is now a contributing columnist for the Washington Times. You can find out more about him, his resources, and columns at dreverettpiper.com. That's dreverettpiper.com. All lowercase. dreverettpiper.com. Dr. Piper, thank you again for joining us today on Weekend Connection. We really appreciate your time and your thoughts on what is occurring in our culture today.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.